Hey, Mike, thanks for joining us today. As way of getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Brian. Thanks for having me. So I'm Mike Lancy, founder of Soundbite AI, which is a software solution that is helping organizations communicate better in the world of hybrid and remote work. And yeah, I got started in sales about 15 years ago out of college. Come from a unique background, I'd like to think, and having studied chemistry and
Oh,
somehow ended up in enterprise software sales shortly thereafter. So I appreciate you having me on the
oh,
call
well,
today.
how's that happen? Because chemistry is not one of the easy subjects.
Yeah, how does that happen? So, to tell you a little bit about myself and kind of my background, always been kind of into numbers and visual thinking and orientation, right?
Yep.
And I think it runs familial, right? It runs in the family. I've got a daughter that is dyslexic, right? And when I went through school, I always tended to gravitate towards the subjects that were more problem solving, right? Versus writing or
Yeah.
memorizing type things. And that's what led me into chemistry because it was the only subject I could really attach myself to where I'd go into any test and I'd be solving problems versus just communicating what I had memorized, right? I always joke with people, but it's been helpful in sales, but I have a very, very short memory of a fish. So
And were you diagnosed as dyslexic also?
Uh, no, I never have been, right? And I think a lot of strides have been made and that type of diagnosis, right? Like it goes from like not being great at school to actually now schools are looking for those types of things in neurodiverse kids. And
Yep.
it's really helpful when they identify it early because then it helps you help your child, right? Understand that they learn differently as well as how they can go about kind of learning. And I think a lot of things for like people like me is maybe you're on the spectrum, maybe you're not, but over time you learn your learning style, right? And that's how
Right.
you have to go about working. So
And
yeah.
when you say problem solving, how did that manifest itself in sales? Because sales is essentially problem solving, right?
Yeah. I always remember back to like day one, 15 years ago, when I was handed a blue sheet.
And a bunch of red flags.
And a bunch of red flags, right? And you sat there and looked at this blue sheet and you were like, all right, we have an outcome we want to achieve. And here's this big blue sheet. And here are all the pieces that kind of fit into that. How do you put them all together? And then how do you execute on those types of discussions, right? The personal connections to help kind of move it along. And I think that for people that think a little bit outside the box is extremely helpful, right? And that's one of the things I think that's helped me help other people throughout the years better themselves in sales, right? So yeah.
And did you stick with blue sheets or did you come up with your own visual or a
you,
microcosm of the problem?
been very fortunate over the years to be associated with some great leaders. I've had the opportunity to work with folks like Cedric Pesch and Paul Oles and Dave Wowine, who are all big students of Medic, right, and commanded the message. So over the years, that style has kind of transitioned. Although I would just say at its core, I think a lot of the same things remain the same when it
Yeah.
comes to working on a deal. They just tend to evolve, right, and modernize, and actually I think get more efficient, right, in helping you identify and then also knock out right things that you might not want to be working on, which is always pretty interesting. So
Yeah, because I think that the best salespeople kind of mold it into the way they work, the way they think.
yes, absolutely true. Once you understand the equation of command of the message and how you can process that type of conversation, it then allows you to have great conversations every time. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And how long did it take you to get comfortable in sales? Because it has some similarities to chemistry, but not many.
Yeah, well, I had an advisor back in college that said to me, as I was going through like my senior year, and he actually kind of pushed me in the direction around, you kind of have a personality where I don't see you in a lab the rest of your life, and encouraged me, right, to look at various options where I could apply the knowledge that I had learned, which was much more process oriented, right,
Yeah.
to other things. And then a little bit of luck, right? So, coming out of school, I was really fortunate to have met a recruiter who introduced me to a couple opportunities that were selling copiers at the time, right? And I got out there and I went and knocked on like 1,000 doors in the middle of summer in St. Louis. It's like 94 degrees. I've got a suit on. I'm sweating through everything. And here I am trying to convince them to switch out one toner package for another, right? And I'm like, that just wasn't going to be for me on the walk-arounds, right? So so then after telling him like, hey, I don't think it's a good fit, is there anything else out there? He was like, well, there is one other opportunity that I'll introduce you to, and the company is Information Builders, who was
Yeah, I remember.
acquired by Informatica, right? And
Yeah.
being in St. Louis, it's not exactly a tech hub, right? At the time, and it continues to evolve and grow like a lot of these cities do. But at the time, I mean, there's really one door that was open to people out of college that showed potential to be good in sales and that had the capacity to understand what an enterprise sale looked like, and that was IBI. So he introduced me to a wonderful woman by the name of Mary McHenry. She is a saint. She is also just like one of the most like just best teachers, right, of how to do pipeline generation activities. And interviewed there, went through it, walked out on the way back, and one of the senior VPs at the time, I'll let him be nameless, but he was like, yeah, have you had a drug test lately? I'm like, huh? And he goes, I'm just kidding, right? Which I'm sure I would have passed, but it's just the type of humor that we were gonna get into right around the world of sales, right? And I'm very fortunate to land there. And they handed me, I mean, this is only 15 years ago, right? And it's how crazy technology flies. But I was handed a phone book. I was handed a couple printed sheets of the top 50 accounts in Nashville, the top 50 companies and whatnot, right? They knew their market. It was looking for big old mainframe shops
Yeah.
that wanted to keep their legacy on-prem infrastructure, that needed reporting platforms, right? And that also wanted to look at self-service as, being their differentiator, right? So after that, I mean, I just remember riding around with reps and sitting in the back of the car, my BlackBerry at the time, right, making cold calls, always making the calls, making sure that I adhered to my process, right, and continued with that. And I think that's the biggest thing that I took away from that, was learning how to, right, get somebody's attention in those accounts. And frankly, 15 years later, that is still one of the most important skill sets that I think anybody could have, even at the top executive level. So,
And
yeah.
how long did it take before you were natural at it? Because that, both the toner selling and the cold calling, they're the kind of hardest of the hard.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's the greatest thing in the world. And it's a game of failure, right? So if you look at my background, collegiate baseball, before that, baseball, sports, et cetera. I mean, that's a game of failure, right?
Yeah.
You fail way more than you ever succeed. And you deal with different days, right? You get to feel, hey, I had a good day, a bad day, et cetera, right? And kind of living through that, I think, was great preparation for sales. You go through your highs, you go through your lulls, and it's always just a matter of like, how do I stay as level as possible without getting too high, without getting too low,
Yeah.
and then trusting the process that you have in place, right, to yield the results in the end. So,
And
yeah.
you were used to having a coach, somebody
Abs-
encouraging you, yelling at you.
yeah, encouragement, right? The best coaches are always encouraging, and they know when to maybe turn it up on you a little bit, right? But at the end of the day, as time goes on, right, generationally, like I've found that today the traditional idea of coaching has definitely evolved in how we approach those types of conversations. And those are some hard lessons I learned in my first management role, right? Is like, the way my coaches coached me in baseball doesn't necessarily translate to the business world. And it takes a few hard lessons, right? You have somebody quit on you and you realize that it wasn't them, it was actually you, right? And you kind of have to take that reflection inward and learn from it. But
Well,
yeah, that for sure.
especially if they've never either done sports or had an instructor or did a performance thing versus a test.
Yes.
Very different. Like
For
baseball is very different than taking a chemistry test.
It certainly is. And it's very exposed, right? Like
Yeah.
baseball is one of the few sports in the world where there's one person in front of 50,000 people who is responsible for pitching that ball and crossing the plate with it. and there is one person on the other end of that ball that has a bat in their hands, and their responsible is to put that thing in play. It's a very,
Were you a
very,
pitcher?
I was, yeah, I was a pitcher. I couldn't be part of a game where I couldn't be part of every play. So I
Well,
had to pitch.
well, maybe you can tell me, you came up through Little League probably when you were a kid,
Yep,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And I don't know if they did this where you were growing up, but where I grew up, the other team would yell at the pitcher the whole time, and it was perfectly acceptable. Name calling, whiff it, you're a loser, you suck. And as a little kid,
That must be East Coast baseball. I'm from the Midwest, but
I grew up in Boston, and that was not only acceptable, it was encouraged. The name and the parents would do it, not just the
yeah.
kids.
Oh man, yeah. I coach Little League baseball now. I've got a 7U team that I do coach with a few buddies, right? And yeah, I can't say that's part of our methodology in helping the young men grow as people. But I can tell you that, yeah, I mean, when you start thinking about like, the different types of things that you overcome, and learning to tune out noise, et cetera, I mean, it all becomes really important, for sure. And
Oh, the pitching also, it looks so simple to somebody who hasn't done it.
Yeah.
Which is a lot like sales.
Yes.
Right? Because not only do you warm up, you have to practice, you have to take care of your arm, you have to visualize. And, the person that you're pitching to wants the exact opposite result as you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's some things to be learned from that, right? Like when you start thinking about like misconceptions of sales and like
Yeah.
the number of reps that it takes, and that's a big thing, is just reps, right? Practice. And if you look at pitching and sales and just life in general, to become really great at something, you got to put the reps in, right? And even from like a just outbound learning how to prospect accounts, they might ask for 60 activities a day, but if you really want to get good at it faster, do 200 and figure out how to be efficient with it, right? And that's the thing that, I mean, even for our 7-year-olds, it's just reps, reps, reps. If you make a mistake, be a fish, forget about it, continue to get your reps in, right? Because over time, that confidence build, everything builds up, right? It's all momentum. All of
Right.
that is momentum, and it just builds up. So
And as a
yeah.
pitcher, typically the coach would spend more time with the pitcher because the pitcher is so critical. And they
Oh,
would sit and be the catcher. And after each pitch, give you a little feedback.
yeah. Yep. And then over time, they continue to even move you further away from the bat, right? And
Yeah.
you get to college, and then all of a sudden you don't hold the bat anymore. All you're doing
Is throwing a ball.
7 days a week is throwing balls and looking in mirrors and working on mechanics and perfecting that game, right? But
And
unless you have that repetition from before, it's hard to really get to that point. So
a
yeah.
lot of, the visualization of seeing the ball go into the strike zone.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Which is
dream it.
a lot about the sales, about anticipating what's going to happen next.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yep. No, that's absolutely true.
What was some of the epiphanies where you kind of, you worked hard and all of a sudden there was a spike up in performance as opposed to a gradual progression?
Yeah, it's funny. I've never hit a quota in any role in my first 9 months. I've never
Really?
like
Yeah.
it, never have in my
Yeah.
first 9 months. Yet year 1 to 2, always been well over 100, 200, 400%, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And I always go back to that like epiphany of process. And the thing is like you have different roles, right? I've always primarily been focused on new account generation, right? My entire career in large enterprise accounts. And
Easy stuff.
the brutal truth about that is that no matter what it is you're working on, it's not going to
Takes
happen
time.
terribly fast. And even as you go from like sales to like a founder and you're focused on that space, you just have to realize and always tell yourself is like, look, these things continue to take time. Trust the process. Trust, hey, is this leading to another conversation, et cetera, right? And yeah, it's a fascinating thing. But once you kind of understand the game you're playing, then you can go play it really well, So
And was that an adjustment going from, certainly the prospecting with information builders to, a long-term enterprise sale where you don't get anything for 2 or 3 quarters?
yeah. Not IBI was always, a pretty lengthy sales cycle for most reps, right?
Yeah.
And what I think was unique about the go-to-market was it was direct go-to-market, right? I mean, the primary source of new business was through cold calling, right? There wasn't a huge reliance on field marketing or marketing at the time, which really helped develop the tissue. I think marketing organizations have gone from like 0 to a billion in their abilities, right? And the whole concept around product-led growth, et cetera. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just exploded. So the game's definitely shifted since then. But, at the end of the day, it's just one of those things that, back to your question around like, how does that prepare you for it, is even in a PLG world, somebody downloads your software for the first time and they're starting to use it, there's still going to be the internal enterprise sale that they have to go through, right?
There's
And
still
you're the
change,
enabler of
there's
that.
still upsell, there's still the
So
walking the
much,
gauntlet to get the paperwork done.
so much, right? To be done there. It's shifted out a little bit, right? But back to your point around that gradual build to hitting that lever, that's the beautiful outcome, right? For both the customer as well for you, right? Is you help them get there, and yeah, it takes longer. You're not selling the $2 million deal up front anymore. You're selling the 5,000, and then you really do have the opportunity to create a real partnership with them and see that adoption and growth go. And I think customer relationships are stronger. Your ability to help sell new business gets stronger, right? Because people who are really using your product are going to be much more proactive in helping you get others to use it. And it's been better for the industry, frankly. So,
And
yeah.
going to the enterprise sale, which, is very tough and it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because like we hear, oh, send me a proposal, which typically is the death nail of the deal versus this a step in the deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because now they won't call you back because they got everything.
Hmm.
They think they have everything. And it's on the list of good ideas we'll buy someday instead of issue we need to solve this quarter.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
How did
And
you learn that? Did you have a mentor there on the enterprise side?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, through every step, right? There's been great mentors. And there's been great mentors that have helped me with, what? Send over that proposal, right? They're probably not going to buy now, but they need to have that if they are ever going to buy later. And you want to leave a good taste in their mouth, right?
Yeah.
Of their experience with you. I find that even on the buyer side now is that like, I want people who are easy to work with, but then
Right.
also ask me the question. I mean, how hard is it to ask the question, hey, what are you going to do with this proposal when I send it?
Nothing.
That's a perfectly acceptable answer, right? Like I love that answer. Hey, I'm so happy you're going to do nothing with it. I'll go ahead and send it to you, right?
I send 2.
Yeah, I'll send you 10 if you'd like. You want all the options? But I mean, truthfully, right? It's asking that question. I think a lot of people forget it. They get excited, they get ahead of themselves,
Right.
where they ask for a proposal, or they ask me to do this, and they forget to ask why, right? And it's really such a simple thing. Why? And then, okay, how can I help, right? Like, what does it look like let's dial it back, right?
Sure.
Why are we doing this?
Right.
Who's it
Why
going to
now?
help?
Yeah.
Yeah, who's it going to help? Why is it going to help them, right? Um, is there anybody else this could help? Like.
And I'm sure you were exposed to a lot of reps. What really differentiated like that top 1% from the middle of the pack?
If there's anything that I say I could take away from like rep profiles and top 1% and stuff, is that I have met so many personalities of fantastic sales reps. And part of it is finding a solution, culture, product that fits you as a salesperson,
Yeah.
that you can succeed with, right? Like I've seen it so many times where like there are great sales reps that put a lot of hard work in and they've not been successful, but then they end up somewhere else and they knock it out of the park,
Yeah.
right? And I'd always tell anyone is like, find where you see yourself fitting for the long term, and the money will follow, right? It's not about the money, right? You get paid well because you're great at what you do. Go find something that you can be great at. And when you find what you're great at, stick with it and have fun with it, right? Because at the end of the day, just like sports, business should be fun, right? We don't wake up every day for business to be not fun. right?
Well,
Because
that's a great point, because a lot of
so
people, especially now, are a lot of switching their jobs, thinking that that's going to cure it. But if you're good at, like, say, selling to IT,
yeah,
but then you go to sell to marketing,
yeah,
and all of a sudden they go, these people aren't as logical as the IT people. I like the IT people. So either you change,
yeah,
or you find you stick with what you're comfortable with and what you're good at.
yeah.
Changing is hard.
It
Your
is. It is.
personality,
And it's not for everybody. I
it's
mean,
not for everybody.
it's not. I actually I've had a career of change, right? Like I think every time I've gone from enterprise business intelligence to unified communications as a service to enterprise content management and business process management, to enterprise like content integration and migration, right? To now where our ideal customers are internal communications and communications people, marketing, right?
Yeah.
And each time it's taken a huge kind of adjustment, right? Now the basic formula remains the same. The execution on every one is drastically different, right? And the conversations, and you have to understand who you are talking to, right? And I think that's the biggest thing is a lot of people, a lot of salespeople I've met over the years, they're always thinking about ourselves or like the
Right.
product or whatever. It's like, no, you really have to like step out of yourself and help
Talk about
understand.
them.
Yeah, I mean, what I do now, it's been really helpful because COVID brought my wife home who works in comms. So I've been sitting 12 feet away from somebody who's dealing with all the pain points we're addressing. And I'm having been married to that for 13 years, right? You start to really kind of know like, hey, this is what the market looks like and here's who the buyers are, et cetera.
Well, that wasn't
And
the
then
motive, though, was it?
for what?
Getting
Soundbite?
married.
Oh.
You're my ideal customer profile. Will you do me the honor?
Yeah. Put a ring on it. That's too good.
Well, I mean, that
But
is how you learn how to talk to your ideal customer profile. Either
it's true.
you hang around with them, you marry them, or you study them.
Yeah, I prefer to have the conversations. I'm not super studious in that regard. So
Yeah. Well,
no.
and you nailed it when you said, people talk about the product themselves, their company. But if you do that, the other person's responsible for mapping that to what they care about
Yeah.
instead of us mapping it for them.
Yes. Or helping them map it.
Yeah. And that takes a little bit of a empathetic, leap from where you are to where you want to be.
Yeah.
But the difference is insurmountable.
Yeah. And it's always much more helpful if you've lived it on your own in some regard. And that's where, I think from like a seller perspective is like, I always look is like, hey, you don't have to be an expert like in certain things, but try to live some of the problems, right? Because empathy is rooted in that, right? That experience. And that's, if you can gain that, it'll help you, immensely, right? In what you're actually doing. So,
Right. In
yep.
the same way, if you started out selling to baseball players or baseball fans, you got that in common. And people get that part, but they
Yeah.
don't get the commonality of what the client does.
Yeah. Yep.
Because that's what they care about. That's why they would want to talk with you instead of have to.
Yep. Absolutely.
And what was the motivation to go out on your own?
It's funny, you go back to mentors and stuff like that, but also just personality and what I've always, and back to finding kind of where you're comfortable, right, is just in the world of business, right? I've always gravitated towards chaos and kind of building things, right? Much more of a builder than a maintainer. And it was just opportunity, right? If you kind of look at like a founder story, it was super opportunistic about, God, probably only 18 months ago. And I'm a firm believer to create a software company today without going for a lot of VC money and doing it the hard way, right? With some bootstrapping. A, you got to have a big problem that you can solve that not a lot of people are looking at. And then B, you've got to have a bulletproof co-founder and couple of developers, not one developer. You need to have 3 developers that are all bulletproof, get the space and that work really well together. And it was just opportunistic that a guy that I had met with 4 years ago, Eric, at a Microsoft trade show, spoke with for about 15, 20 minutes. He left enough of an impression on me where I absolutely remembered him, and his company went through a layoff in COVID.
Yeah.
So I cold called him, said, hey, Eric, I remember you from 4 years ago. I know what you can build. Here's a couple ideas. Do you have any ideas that you might want to work on? Because, you know, it's got to be stuff that they want to do too, right? It's got to be a partnership. That's a marriage, by the way.
It is. Yeah.
Absolutely a marriage. And one of the most critical decisions you'll ever make is with your co-founder. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the origin story of Soundbite. Is we sat down and went through a few different problems, a few different things. And he said, I think I know what I want to do. And we started working on it together. So.
And no fear about, you know, because I'm sure from time to you start to the time you make $1 or hopefully dollar more than one, you know,
It's
it's scary, isn't it?
yeah, it absolutely is, right? And I had a job at the time, and I was an executive and working with it. And luckily, the organization I was with, A, I was brought on to build out the sales team. B, we had an immense amount of success, right? We doubled the company year over year over year. We opened up new markets that just it continued to accelerate, and you know, I kind of got to a point where the business would continue to grow. The business started to outgrow what I was really good at, right? And kind of the founder has been a close friend and mentor from day one. I mean, going back to it, I ended up there for the work I had done at 2 companies before that, and ultimately made an investment in this company. And you know, the founder of the organization, he kicked me out of the bird's nest. So he said, you know, it's your time, right? He's like, I think you got something here. I think it's tangible and you need to go figure it out. So fly, birdie, fly.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, I don't think I would have ever done it. I mean, honestly, like if he hadn't helped me get out of the nest, like, I don't think I would have been where I am today. Right. And I can tell you, going from like the commitments, like just sales, to actually building something from day one, it's just so much more fulfilling for me personally, right, than anything else I've ever done. So
Well,
yeah.
and it also cures that problem that we have in sales of essentially we get a new job every year, whether we change titles or companies anyway, you get a new comp plan, new territory.
Yeah.
And when you go out on your own, that doesn't, you get, it compounds every year. You build off of the last year instead of giving up half of it to someone else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the most gratifying thing though, as a founder, is actually paying your people. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, like if you think about like the, you know, just capitalism in general, is the most gratifying thing in the world is creating jobs, right? I don't look at it personally other than, are we getting new customers that we're solving problems? Are they happy with the work that we've delivered? And is the team, you know, is this what they want to do every day? Right. And are they, you know, part of the mission? And then absolutely, you know, everybody needs to be compensated fairly for what they do, right?
Yeah.
And that's the most gratifying part, is taking care of the guys, frankly.
Cool.
So yeah,
Great.
it's
Hey,
good.
it's been a fun
So
conversation, Mike. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
yeah, for sure. LinkedIn. So if you look up Mike Lancy on LinkedIn, Soundbite AI, which I think we've got some really cool use cases. Salespeople, you know, are neurodiverse by nature.
Yes.
And, you know, I always, I always ask myself, like, you know, God, what would have been amazing, right? Like when I was working for Cedric, and I was working for Paul's at Fuse, right? These are like just killer sales leaders, right? And you only get so much attention, right? The bigger the organization gets. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to hear our elevator pitch and how our chief revenue officer describes the company to investors, or maybe a war story, right? As he's out in the field talking about certain things, right? And that's what Soundbite's helping a lot of sales leaders do now, is create and share these sound bites that people can listen to directly in Microsoft Teams and Slack, right? And it's really helping leaders create better authentic connections with people out in the field, as well as internal communicators, et cetera. And it's a real exciting thing that's going on there. So yeah. So, yeah.